that kind of guide sugar for those kinds.
Thank you. First, I just want to say thank you. It's Chef Tom, right?
Yes.
Chef Tom and his team for providing such a delicious lunch to us. And I know you put a lot of thought and did a bit of research of recipes for putting this menu together. So I wanted to acknowledge that up front and say thank you to them. Also, I just really quickly wanted to highlight, so part of my role at American Indian Health is, my official title is Program Manager for Food Sovereignty and Wellness Initiative. So basically anything to do with food is my team. Really lucky I get to talk about food all day and cook and garden. But part of that is what I try to do, especially in the cooking classes, is draw a distinction between traditional foods and cultural foods, and that they're distinct things from each other. And so how I define it in the classes, and people may have different ways of talking about this, but I see traditional foods as foods that come from our ancestral homelands, that are tied to this particular place, have a very long history of nourishing both our bodies and our spirits as Indigenous people, or as people in general. Whereas cultural foods have a place in our history and speak to struggles to survive and adapt, and how times change and culture has to adapt based on conditions that people are living in. And so, in no way am I speaking negatively of the menu. I want to say that, but I do want to point out some things that are on it that just are new foods to this continent. And so, like pork, beef, wheat, chicken, Nicole waved her fry bread because it's made out of wheat flour. That's a really great example of a cultural food, because oftentimes people are like, oh, what are native foods? Fry bread. And I'm like, but that's more of a cultural food, because fry bread really came about when those commodity foods, the fashion foods of flour, specifically beef flour, sugar, different things were introduced to our communities, usually through the treaty process. But when those were fulfilled, it oftentimes was late. They didn't arrive on time. If they arrived at all, they were really weaker quantity, and a lot of people died of malnutrition, starvation, made us more susceptible to infectious disease. But also, over time, fry bread especially has become a very complicated food because it also speaks to our resistance. It's a resistance food, adapting. And for a lot of people, it's a symbol of home and of comfort food. And we don't want to deny people that either. But in a lot of ways, commodity foods, and there's still a lot of Native people that live on commodity foods now, Native communities, has created over decades and generations health epidemics in our community because not having access to healthy, nutritious food. And so I just wanted to uplift that I really appreciate the thought and intention of this menu, providing this really wonderful, delicious lunch for us, but also being aware that there's a difference between the traditional and the cultural food.
And the human is just amazing, and that's like the tradition food. Wild rice, sorry.
What's the direct translation?
Good berry.
Okay.
That's what I work. That's from the Great Lakes, from this area.
Fish and squash.
Corn and a lot of foods that you're very familiar with, strawberries, tomatoes are from this continent. A lot of foods that you're familiar with are actually foods from Turtle Island.
Yeah, when you think about when the settlers came over here, they had no food on their ships that were new to them, and so we taught them how to survive. And many of the food, my people alone, we had over 300 different types of vegetables, fruits, stone fruits, fruit, vegetables. I mean, just this variety of foods that we cultivate from the earth, forage from the earth, including fungus and different varieties of salt leaf, sugar leaf, sweet leaf, right? Like, we didn't have white sugar, white flour, all these things. And then that doesn't include our needs, right? So,
Yeah. And I just speak to that a little bit because of my role, but also like I think through our food systems lens and think about food systems a lot. And our food system as Indigenous people was weaponized against us in many, many ways and continues to be. There's so much revitalization and beautiful work happening all over the world of revitalizing Indigenous food systems, the knowledge around that, the technologies around that. And I mean, it's the original local, really, you know, and I just encourage you to, I guess, learn about what some of the original foods are of the place where you live. Thank you for
Thank you so
allowing me
much.
to.
No, that's exactly what this is all about. We'll get to questions in a bit. I just wanted to kind of frame that discussion to reground us. We just went through the blanket exercise, heavy but within community and sharing that space with one another. I think was very beautiful moment for myself, and especially in the circle of love. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I just want to say thank you also to you all for showing up for another block of time. We are all busy. We all have emails. But I appreciate you for staying present. And I hope that you can get out of this conversation what you see too. So without further ado, I trust that you honor all the things that we've done before at the Fireside. I can turn out the heat if we need so I thought we're busy. You all are busy. Prairie Rose, we have flights to catch. Probably haven't been home in weeks, it sounds like. But I just wanted to ask, just to kind of reground while we're here in purpose. Can you speak a little bit about why you decided to spend today with us? It was some prep calls. You were on vacation in Hawaii. We had a prep call. She took a 15-minute call with me.
on the beach.
Share a little bit about why today is important, like maybe play today is important to you.
Yeah, I feel like it's extremely important, and it's worth stepping out of vacation. I mean, like I can't check out. This is like so educating philanthropy and even beyond philanthropy is about our history, is empowering to decolonize, and it's more than work. It's like my life's work, and so I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to go to any invitation that I can, that I know that I'm going to be with people who make a difference. So if I can make a difference with the people who make a difference, then it just resounds, and it has to happen. It's time. The thing that I can't even watch the news. I don't watch the news actually, but I hear the headlines, in social media, and it's just tragic what's happening. It's like you can't think it can get worse. Like it can't get worse. We're at the worst. No, tomorrow some things get worse, and it's like we are so in dire need of healing today that I have to do something. And so by doing the truth and healing work specific to Native Americans, I'm doing it.
Yeah, I grew up in a multicultural household. My dad is full-blooded American Indian, Northern Shannon, Rikra, other tribes and then ancestry. My mom, immigrant from the Germans in Russia. And when I was younger, we got called the Yeska because my dad was friends with a lot of Dakota people. And the Yeska, how it was translated to me at that time, was just half-breed, right? It was half-breed. But that multicultural household was really unique because my experience of my mother worshiping Christian God and my dad living his faith out in cultural and ceremonial ways, there was no blame or shame. It was just like, this is how we experience God, this is how we experience God, this is what you do, and nothing really forcing us to be one way over the other. There was no like sense of like, this one's better because it's the dominant culture, right? There was just none of that. So I was really, we had other ills within our family and our community, abuse, addiction, a lot of other things that are low income communities face, but it wasn't necessarily because we're native, we're poor, or all natives are poor. Like, it wasn't that because we grew up in a multicultural community. So I saw this, I was really fortunate in a way to really grow up in a very diverse neighborhood, low income neighborhood, but it's like, well, everybody's poor here, right? Like, it's just reality, we're all struggling. But there was no shame around it. And so as I got older and going into schools and being sent to boarding school, and I'm the first generation of my family to choose to go to boarding school, right? Like, my dad was forced, we got to choose, and we're like, yeah, let's get out of here, let's go to boarding school. Raise heck somewhere else. That's when my kind of duality of identities started to really, not necessarily conflict, but I was faced to deal with that. So this work of understanding like racial inequality and justice, and then through a lens of like equity, through an indigenous lens, and justice through an indigenous lens, especially understanding this intentional design of how we are in this country. I grew up in a household that didn't shame me for identities, and here I step into these constructs that shame me for my identities, not just being poor and native, or not just being native or being a woman, but also being like poor and all these other labels that we have for people. And it must be because you're native, right? It must be because of these reasons. So I took on this role as an educator to not only humanize the design and the construct that we're all in, whether we benefit from it or not. There's a real hunger right now, especially within people in fields that have thought they were of the best intentions and trying to do good in the world around and make the world a better place and have this lens of social justice and equity. And when we add the lens of equity for Indigenous people, there is this justice element that includes land and money, right? So how do we then define that for foundations or for most of the work I do with faith-based institutions? What does justice look like? Right? It's capacity building, it's directing resources to people on the ground, it's reimagining leadership and roles around leadership and expectations within those roles of leadership, to then the mechanisms of how we serve these communities. And a big part of conversations that I have are those funding mechanisms. Gino's talking about philanthropy, and I'll kind of close with this piece of, Native organizations only get 1/4 of 1% of philanthropy monies in the country, and where's the justice in that? Because a lot of that money is still defined by the giving agencies. We'll fund the arts, right? Whatever that is, right? We'll fund, this work, but are we giving these organizations room to really breathe and establish their own capacity and agency to do the work that they're called to do? So as an educator, I do this work because it is making the world a better place through the truth and healing journey, centering that truth, hard truths, hopefully not in a shaming, blaming way, just this acknowledgement of we're all here by design. Now what are we going to do together?
Why I'm here? It's a long story that starts way before I was born, and but I've spent the last almost 34 years trying to know that story of those that came before me and what contextualize why my family's experience has been the way it has been and why my experience has been the way it has been. and being able to name that so that we can move on from that, like, and not just like in a forgetful way, but like in a healing way of like acknowledging and then what we do with that. And I think I try to show up as bravely as I can in spaces of I try to walk this line of like I don't want my trauma to be performative at all, like, but I do want to be authentic with people about what this means to me in a very real way. And for so long, Indigenous people's self-determination and agency has been denied, and I really I want communities to have that sense of agency. I really have a vision of our ancestral knowledge and technologies being seen as valid, and that we don't have to do things in the Western way, we can do things in our way just because we're Indigenous people, and that's our right to. And I also like have a vision and real desire for all of our relationships to be healed with each other. And a lot of it comes back to relationships. And I think a lot of the history, part of what we heard earlier, but so many other examples, has denied all people part of their humanity, and taken different parts of our humanity, because our humanity is our relationship with each other and with this place and our other relations, both human and not. And so a lot of this work is remembering our relationship to each other, and healing that. And so, I just keep finding myself for different reasons. I think like helping to create and hold that space for these type of conversations and type of relational healing to happen, and for us to find new ways of existing with each other that really affirms each other and is life affirming in so many different ways. And so that's kind of my vision and hope for being here, is doing that.
You told me to come here.
Yeah.
But in a very, so it's simply ending the problem that you like, right? Like, so it's relationship building, right? So, and I think that's the core of a lot of what you're just talking about. I was here 2 summers ago, got to work with the environment team, which I miss. And at our staff retreat, bravely but also stupidly said we should do a land acknowledgement, and they said, so you should do one. And I was like, where's my elder? And there wasn't one. And I actually thought about it a lot that night. It was like, and Facebook message, because I can get on Facebook Messenger with elders easier than like calling them on a phone sometimes. And said, is this appropriate for me to do? And they're like, well, sometimes you have to step up and step into things, whether you think your time, if you're ready. And so, nervous as hell, did one. And the reason why I was willing to step in and step up into that space, because I really wanted, thankfully, a room of philanthropy folks to understand that there are people in your own backyard that you should understand and know about, and to start to build those relationships right here in Detroit. And so I was willing to do that, to start that conversation, and then with people that have run with it. And one of the critiques of land acknowledgements and this process is that it's a one-off, that it's something that you stand in front of a crowd and you get bold credits because you stand in front of a crowd and they're like, let me acknowledge this land, and then you walk away and you don't have to do anything else, right? But wow, aren't you a great person for saying that? And so I'm willing to participate in efforts like this that are doing harder work, deeper work, more sustainable work. So that's why I'm here, because we've built a relationship, and you're willing to continue to build those relationships. And through those relationships, in my ideal world, that's where real change happens. And that's where real healing I've seen happen in our communities too. So both on the off cuff, but also deeply, profoundly, because you asked me to come.
Oh, okay. Well, so Nicole invited me because they were looking for a native perspective on a land acknowledgement art piece. And so this year has been insane. It's my second year in college. I've been shoved into work in the community, and I became vice president of my native board out of surprise. And I've just been, I guess, being told by God, like, this is your time to make a change. I feel like I'm not ready, but
Step up and
yeah, I'm just doing my best in the way I can to change the earth.
I'm really grateful for that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was being in a relationship with philanthropy. This is the Kresge Foundation, and a bunch of staff members from the Kresge Foundation. And one thing that I've heard, I've only been in philanthropy for about a year and a half. It feels like a long time anyway. One thing I've heard is that philanthropy doesn't, there's no incentive to hear what you don't want to hear. So I thought about just, if philanthropy was a person, what might you say to that person, to that entity? And I heard themes of just building relationships and being present, the self-determination and whatnot. So I invite, you all don't have to speak on it, but if there's something that wasn't lifted up in the kind of what we just talked about, I invite a couple of you to share with me.
So if philanthropy was a person, and I'm in a relationship with that person, I would ask them to do some reflection. So one thing I would say is, where does the wealth come from in your particular example? And in many examples, it comes from resources, from the land, from like oil or water or stuff like that. And I would also ask if they are giving back from however it came, what way are they giving back specific to how it came? Not just in general, but specific, and if they are. And if they were interested in maybe doing something like that, I would help them, I would give them some resources for self-assessment. They don't have to tell me the answers, I don't need to know the answers, but ask yourself, especially even just being on the location of the people who were once here, how are you being inclusive? Or is your values about equity and justice? And in philanthropy, many times it is, at least in my experience. And maybe I'm living in a bubble because I'm working with amazing foundations who are the rock stars. That's who comes, right? It's the ones I don't know about. Those are the ones who probably need the most help. But the ones who are interested. And some of the assessment questions I would ask them about is, do you have representation? Do you have voice within your organization, within your leadership, on your board, within your directors, managers, that high level, within staff? And if you don't, I would ask, well, are you interested in having that? Because having those voices at the table will help guide everything. If you don't have it, you're just throwing, darts in the dark, hoping you hit a target once in a while. And you might not. So that's what I would tell philanthropy is, if you believe in equity and justice, then let's go on a journey. Let's talk. Let's see where we can get. And the only way I think really is having those voices, within and at the table all the time. And some foundations are like, well, we don't have that portfolio. You don't have to have that portfolio. It doesn't have to. You can just have that strand all the way through, especially back to equity and justice. And also knowing, like, back to that assessment, you know, is our giving level at an equity level for the population? And if it is, awesome. And there are some that are. And if it's not, well, what can we do to change that?
I mean, just very much taking action, right? We're going to take that time to reflect and go on that journey. And I think one powerful way to make that commitment known is to acknowledge it publicly, right? So this is one way that, like, land acknowledgements, because they're so new in this country. I mean, countries like Canada and Australia and others have been doing land acknowledgements for more than a decade, and they become somewhat of a pacification. And that's where people get in trouble with, like, this, all right, we just did this, but now what, right? But as an organization, well, let me back up a little bit. I worked with one organization who gave, over a 10-year span, $60 million to Indian country within 3 different states, and realized it was kind of a black hole because they didn't see any impact, social or otherwise, with that funding. So that they took a step back, reflected, went on that journey, like, okay, how do we actually make an impact? You know, there's language revitalization, there's governance structures, you know, just so many issues that we can address, but we're not having any impact. $60 million is a lot of money within 10 years. Not a lot for some organizations, and for many others, a lot of money. For tribal communities, it's huge, especially the ones that they're serving. And so they took a step back and thought about their mechanisms in place of how they could benefit communities, and realized that the communities that they wanted to serve need the capacity to breathe a little bit. The organizations that they serve just needed some space to breathe and think about the future and not be so crisis mode all the time. So they made an investment into leadership, and now 11 years into that piece, there's a community of about 300 tribal members who've now gone through this leadership program who are having a real impact in their communities. And they then can kind of climb the chain of access to resources through that particular foundation, and get fellowships and community grants, and I mean, just so much resources now to have that meaningful impact, right? So what Gina was saying, getting resources to those communities. But that self-assessment is so important too, I think, for organizations, because if you're not taking the time to reflect and give yourself some grace to be like, okay, we've done it for this long forever, or this way for so long, and it's what we've always done, but is it time to change? Because leadership evolves, communities change and evolve, so then our roles and expectations as leaders have to evolve. And when we think of racial equity and justice, how are we applying that as leadership competencies to the work that we do versus this quota, right? Affirmative action was a tool because we wanted to involve and engage people of color and indigenous people, but for many it became a crutch, and so we're so happy to be having 50% of our people women and 30% people of color, and just putting these quotas in place, but is that really meaningful for the communities? So getting back to the land acknowledgement piece, I think when you take that time to reflect, you make it personal. I have a community organizing background, so I always think, like, how are we connected to the public? How are we connected to something larger? If it's healthcare reform, you know, how do I start from it's personal to me and then connecting it, right? So when you think about land acknowledgements, you know, you're honoring the people in the space. That's the personal piece. It's like we are here in the ancestral land or the land homelands of, and making a connection to the foundation work. Our foundation benefited from the removal of this people, so it opened up resources like logging, like whatever, which our walk was built upon. We recognize the damage it's done to communities, but our void of whatever it is, and then make a commitment, right? Then we're going to commit to giving 10% of our giving to Native-owned organizations, or you know, build partnerships with the tribes and have representation on the boards, right? So you're really making it live. So.
I just want to say something quick before I answer the question. Something Rose just said made me think about it. So over the weekend, we our agency held a storytelling event where we invited elders who have lived in the Detroit area to share their experience being Indigenous people over several decades, so contemporary storytelling. And there was an elder that was speaking to before the current Native agencies existed, how the community kind of moved around. So they had been already incentivized to move into urban areas, very diverse Native community, but they needed like a gathering place, and they were having a really hard time. For a while, they were in this building. They found space on John R. in a building, and I'm glad you said that because it reminded me I wanted to bring this up today. So they were in this space for, I think, over a year. It was kind of a community center, and then actually it was Kresge actually bought the building, and it displaced the community center. And so they were then, and the elder was telling the story, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I don't know exactly where that building was, but it was Miss Eva was telling that story. I think it might have been after that. It was, I think, after the YMCA building, but it was about that same time because there were a few different locations. They couldn't find a permanent place where the community could just come together and like, support each other. And then when they did, they got displaced again. And that just reminded me of like when you're acknowledging like the people right where you're at, like so. But if philanthropy was a person that I was in a relationship with, I would feel pretty hurt right now. And I recently heard that an apology without change behavior is just manipulation. And I know that sounds really harsh. But you know, if a land acknowledgement in part is like acknowledging that, but if it doesn't result in change behavior, then like what is this? I think you spoke to that a bit too. And I think that there have been a lot of pieces with the history earlier where, you know, some of it was done with malicious intent, but some of it was benevolent racism. So thinking that we know what's best for your community, we know how you should be living, that your way is wrong, and we're going to help you. And you know, different groups have had that type of mentality. I come from a social work background. Social work was founded in that too, that idea. And so I think that change behavior is a really important piece to like unlearning that benevolent racism. And because the benevolent piece is that it is well-intentioned, but the way that it's happening, it's just perpetuating the position that we've been put in, the social position where we've been put in the society. And so apology, like in some ways, you know, helps healing, but it doesn't actually repair the relationship if the relationship continues to work in the same way. And personally, if it was a person, I wouldn't want to continue a relationship in a lot of ways with someone that repeatedly would apologize and then not change behavior to make the relationship better and healthier. Yes.
And I would also say, like, but also be okay with being awkward in that relationship. So, I just think back to being in high school. So I went to high school in Ann Arbor, and I was really blessed to go to high school with just about like every single type of person. It was amazing. And I have a friend that wore a hijab, and I remember having these conversations with her that, like, because she was my friend, I could have these conversations. I was like, what's up with this? Like, why? Like, what is your family like? And she's like, what you don't realize is I don't have to do my hair every morning. And then as a teenage girl, I was like, that blew my mind. Like, and she's like, in our tradition, you decide when you're 18 if you continue wearing a hijab or you don't. And so if I had a relationship with philanthropy, I'd also want the other person to not be shut down, you know, and feel like they couldn't have those conversations about the things that might be awkward or uncomfortable about like moving forward in those spaces. Because when you build a relationship, when you build a real relationship built on trust, you can have those relationships. You can have those potentially really awkward conversations, because on both sides of that, you can say, you're stepping out of line. You're stepping out of line, and you keep on stepping out of line Come on, let's be real. You're not funding Indian country. Like, you're just not funding it. Let's be real about this. You need to be funding the proper initiative. You need to be funding people in your own backyard. You need to be funding these people. So let's be real. But you can also have those real conversations and potentially awkward conversations if I was having a relationship.
Well, again, I'm not a public speaker, but if I ask philanthropy, I would ask them how long are you willing to stay, and do you have a time limit on which you think you will get out of this relationship? Don't just focus on the big events. Do you care about the little pleasures and little success? Or because a lot of times they put a time limit, oh, you have 5 years to do a complete turnaround. And is that even realistic? And what is a turnaround? And is it sustainable? Say oh yeah, it's going good, but what if after you leave they go back down again? What's the point if you do have success in 5 years? What about 10, 20, 30 years? So I think what is your time limit and how long would you be willing to fight? And how sustainable are your efforts?
Well, I love how you kind of took the metaphorical relationship and made it a little bit more intimate. Sticking with that theme and knowing that for Kresge specifically, so let's get a little bit more specific, our funding, where we land under our urban opportunity framework is in America's cities. And I know that there is a strong contingent outside of American cities, but we also know that 75% of natives occupy and live in their homelands around U.S. metropolitan areas. So if that relationship, say Kresge through KLAE, if KLAE is wildly successful, that relationship, you get married. Friends, let's do the thing.
At least move in together.
Yeah. What does that look like under that urban opportunity framework? What does KLAE being wildly successful look like?
So for me, one of the things about urban versus rural or reservation, or to say the tribal headquarters, a lot of times there's a little bit of tension between resources and where they're going. Are they going to the reservation or are they going to urban centers? But we do know that more people are living in not on tribal land than ever before. So we know the majority of people are not there. But so often, in just trying to be respectful of tribal sovereignty, funders are looking to the leadership of the tribe, where again it's the small amount of people that are actually there when everyone else is not there. So I would say don't limit yourself. I would say give you both. And it doesn't have to be supporting initiatives directly on reservations, but then the urban centers are where folks are looking for supports. And I'm sure you guys probably learned about relocation centers, and a lot of our families have been affected by the promise of leaving the reservation to come to get training and jobs and housing and being able to, pull yourself out of reservation mentality. And folks who moved off of the reservations often did and found themselves living in with no housing, basically, first of all. And then when they did find housing, it was just very poor quality. The jobs weren't all that they said they were going to be. So basically moving off the reservation into ghettos and losing a lot of that community because they weren't necessarily put together within communities. So now scattered across urban areas. And so the urban programs were the one thing that brought everybody together. And so supporting those types of projects and groups are critical, to support so many people. And so even in Los Angeles, there's a few different urban groups, but the Native community is huge. And without it, I think folks would just be lost. And so what would be wild success? We both and we value Native Indigenous people enough that we're gonna support both and not pick either one. I've heard that over and over. Oh, well, we're gonna support the tribe and the tribe is on the reservation. So urbans, you guys are just left out. The tribe has to take care of you.
Yeah, the foundation I mentioned earlier was specific to 23 tribes within their region, and they just, in their 10th year of funding Native leaders, opened it up to urban natives. So they realized, like, yeah, there's 50% of us live off of the reservation. So what are we doing to build capacity there? Because it isn't just that natives who live on the reservation have an impact, it's natives everywhere have an impact, right, in their communities. You experience the blanket exercise, and there's so much we left out. I mean, it's just this snapshot that Gina mentioned before, and urban relocation is one of those pieces that we left out of the narrative.
We should have it.
We should. I mean, let's make it 2 hours long. You know, it's one of those pieces that has damaged our communities in big ways, because now there's like urban trauma around our narrative versus just this reservation trauma that we haven't addressed as a people. And I think, I mean, when I think about it too, like my dad got a one-way ticket to LA from Montana, you know? He totally got back to Montana, got a one-way ticket to, I think it was Chicago or Minneapolis, one of those two, and went back home because there was just no resources there. They basically are like, okay, go fish, but didn't give you the rods, didn't give you the resources to make a rod, like there was just ill-equipped plans, right? And kind of almost unfunded mandates to remove urban natives, and this was in the 70s, 60s and 70s, you know? So all of this is fairly recent in our history, that we can kind of come into our own, establishing our own agency really within our programs on the reservations and off the reservations. Because when you think about even just boarding school, I mean, that was 150 years, over 150 years of removing our children. And then in 1978 saying, okay, you can have them back, without equipping the community to take their children back. And so 40 years, is it 40 years? Can't do math. 1978 to 2018. Is that 40 years? It's about that, right? I'm not mathing today. Where we're just starting to see some impact with tribes saying, all right, we can educate our children, let's somehow put our culture back in, teach our language, center our values. We may not know our language anymore, but we'll teach what we can, right? We'll find these resources to do what we can. The church might have ruined our understanding of what our spirituality was, but we're going to live our faith and our values out loud however we can, however colonized we become, right? Because assimilation was a tool of oppression until the 1980s for us. And so it's very recent that we are even able to celebrate our identity, our ceremony, our language out loud, our practices out loud, and be in community with one another safely. But there's still that after effect of we're like what's the word? There's still this real threat of economic taken away from us because it's still very recent in our history. So if something like KLAE can be very successful, it's about those relationships, and it's about the full acknowledgement of somebody's person, not just the abbreviation that you understand it to be, but recognizing and almost being trauma-informed, I guess, creating a trauma-informed space and means of giving and relationship building. It's going to take some work, but I feel it's a really good investment because it's those intangible pieces right now that are so much more meaningful than the tangible pieces.
To continue the analogy of a relationship, if we're moving into other stages of our relationship, I was just thinking a little bit about conversations that my partner and I had around like when we were writing our vows to each other, and like part of the conversation that we had was about interdependence, and that neither of us we're not independent of each other, and we're not codependent on each other, but that we wanted to live in a way with each other that would allow each of us to walk our own path, like, and be the best version of ourselves, not version of you, not version of you. I get to be the version of me. I get to be my own piece of that, but with you. And getting to like bring that to each other. And so automatically when we were like taking things to the next level, I went to like, well, if I was really in a relationship, like what would that next level look like? It would be that I don't lose my own identity in that relationship, that I still have my agency, but that we find a way that we both can have the life that we want, and help support each other in that. And I think that makes a really beautiful relationship.
I'm really curious on a real level, in the next 3 years, what would you love to see with the food sovereignty program? Like, what would be your dream? Like, if this took off, and if this was supporting of this, like, what would be your dream? I'm curious.
It's really hard.
Like, that would be like the marriage, that would be like the honeymoon stage of the relationship.
Oh man.
Like,
it's
what
so
one
hard because
thing?
we've had to think so
Like one thing that would be like a dream for the honeymoon dream.
a space for land-based education for urban Native peoples, like a space that we can like teach in our own way and like our life ways, and like a space really just to do that and to be ourselves without having to justify anything anymore.
She's pretty good on the spot. Thank you for bringing her out.
So I want my next step in the relationship is that, and Kresge to donate, I don't know, whatever it needs to donate to make that happen. Real talk.
I don't know, maybe because, like, I'll say, like, campus life is not very embracing of Native identity in general. So I think if there's, like, an urban center and, like, a center in rural communities that, like, can bring the, like, culture of the res and, like, the culture of the city and, like, bring it to university, because university comes from all over. Because, like, at least at Wayne State, there's, like, nothing at all. Because, like, even, like, for cultural monuments and stuff, none are recognizing natives. Like, how nothing is, like, it's like a wasteland. So I wonder if, like, having a space, like, that recognize their natives here in the city, or, like, in this area even, that would be, like, big for, like, because, like, usually universities are, like, cultural hubs, too. Like, oh, I can learn about them, and they should also learn about us, and we can learn about each other.
That's a discussion we're having at Michigan State too, is having a space on campus. We have a non-handicap accessible space for people.
It's working on the whole TV.
That brings me back to my experience at Johns Hopkins University, where we had a day called Do Pass the Culture. We started 5 graduate students, but it was all about culture sharing in their own way. Of course, Hopkins had some resources to support it. I want to make sure we have time to field any questions. So, Marie, we talked a little bit specifically around land acknowledgements and who delivers them.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll open it up.
At Michigan State, this is a discussion that we've been having a lot about. In this past year, I'm the graduate assistant for the American Indian and Indigenous Studies program, and we have land acknowledgement ourselves at MSU that we came out with. But there is a great debate about who gives that land acknowledgement. I'm actually not of two minds of this. I actually think that there's great power in that if you're not Native, if you give land acknowledgement. There's great power in if you are Indigenous in giving it. But we're having the next part of this conversation that we haven't even talked about. We just had this conversation at a faculty meeting 2 weeks ago. Is this land acknowledgement 2.0 that we're doing at MSU, where if you're non-native, how do you give a land acknowledgement in a good way? And so we're discussing how do you do this and kind of maybe coming up with a guide, like bullet point guide. And one way that we're talking, the discussion that we're having at MSU around it is that the way to not just get the vote credits and like walk away, is to have our standardized language, but then at the end, you kind of have to fill in what you're gonna do. Like, what is your relationship? What it, like, okay, you've done the standardized, this is the Anishinaabe land and all of our standardized language, but then now what is your relationship to the land? Who else are you acknowledging personally? And also maybe your position, whatever you are, faculty, dean of so-and-so, or whatever, staff, student. So that's kind of what we've been working on, 2.0.
Yeah, I have a little something. So we've been having that discussion as well, even in Prairie Rose. When in 2000, the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, Kevin Gover, issued an apology on behalf of the Bureau of Indian Affairs for all the assimilation and terrible programs that they had been doing to assimilate Native people. And it was really a powerful apology. You can read it online, but it was the wrong person who gave it. It was a Native person apology. It should have been somebody higher up, and it should have been the non-natives apologizing. So it was good. But for me, it was also kind of a little bit of wrong person was apologizing, And it's, for me, the land acknowledgement can be very powerful when it's the non-native people who are doing it. Now, just as I know it was the United Philanthropy Forum asked me to do a land acknowledgement, and I told them no, they have to do it. Because I wanted them to research, learn, do it. And then I seen Prairie Rose were talking, then she sent me a video of when she just did at Native, or something Roots.
Oh, Netroots Nation.
Netroots Nation. And it was amazing. And it's kind of like opportunity to, if something, like you didn't have a mic, you didn't have a voice, and somebody gave you a mic because you're gonna do a land acknowledgement, you take that mic. And she rocked it. It was like so amazing. But there's also times where we want people to grow. They're interested, they're learning, but you also want them to grow. And if they can do it, that is so powerful. So I think it depends.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And one part, especially in, so I work with largely the Lutheran churches in the country, and Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada has been doing acknowledgements for over 10 years, and it's definitely become pacification. And in the United States, we've taken the opportunity to do much more meaningful, deeper land acknowledgements. And if we get local Native people to come in, we consider that a welcome. We ask them because we have that relationship, and we're not just putting them on the spot to do a land acknowledgement. Especially when there's no relationship there. It's like, hey, come in for 5 minutes, do this, and see ya. Doesn't give them the respect and dignity they deserve. And so really about being relational and putting those practices in place. If you're inviting local tribal members to do this, it's considered a welcome, right? Versus the land acknowledgement that is for natives and non-natives alike to really acknowledge the space and our relationship within this space. So we've somewhat differentiated the terminology a little bit, but it's much more helpful because then non-natives can be like, oh, cool, we can do a land acknowledgement. But it has to include those relational pieces, historical practices, and really why they're doing the land acknowledgement now. So, like the ELCA repudiated the doctrine of discovery, so they're breaking down frameworks of oppression. And so based on that, they're committed to making right relationships with Indigenous people. So they acknowledge that until we have a relationship with the local Indigenous people, we are working on that and fulfilling this commitment by acknowledging who's here and who's not around.
I think that's an important kind of welcome. So I got to go to New Zealand this past summer, and they have the Maori have their actual welcome over their like you are welcome into the marae, the reading house, and this is like the proper welcoming ceremony, which within that they're like doing a land acknowledgement, but it is a proper like welcoming onto their lands, and that's kind of, we've taken that part of it and constructed it for our own purposes in a way, you know, but I like that differentiating between those two things.
Unless anybody has any burning comments.
I guess like Wayne State specifically, one of the former students, David, like they're now wanting to do a land grant at Wayne State, but he almost didn't want to give the blessing because they mentioned the email because other universities are doing it. Like just don't do it just because it's like, oh, if they're doing it, we should do it too. Like don't do it because, oh, I think I should because it was nice to do it because I honor them. I want them to work.
Do the work.
Yeah.
Do the work, yeah, gotta do the work.
What? There, of course, tons more branches on that tree that I want to climb. Fun to use earthly metaphors. But what questions are bubbling up for people in the room? We have some brilliant cultural carriers. Anything specific to Kresge or anything that we talked about, or blanket exercise or this conversation?
I think to kind of help frame our thinking, what kind of efforts have worked nationally or globally that promote cultural awareness and empowerment of Indigenous people?
A little bit of bright spotting, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think when you let tribes lead the way. So we have two funding streams. One of them is specific to Native American youth, Gen Indigenous, and the second one is Native Voices Rising, which is about civic engagement. And they're for Native-led nonprofit organizations. And we partner with Minneapolis Fund for the youth and Common Council Fund for the civic engagement. And every single grantee has culture within their proposal and their work. Every single one. It's not a requirement. There's no bullet. There's no request. But so we're letting them lead. And they're leading with culture. That is what is their resiliency. And so letting tribes and tribal organizations lead, that's the bright spot. Because if you're trying to make people fit into a box, even like as I talk about assessment, this isn't specific to you guys at all, but there's places who are trying to build Native voices into their talent pool, to their staffing, but then they want you to move someplace. That's not your community. How many Native people are going to move to that community that's not their community? None. So because of that, they're limiting themselves. But if you let the tribal folks lead the way, they wouldn't be moving there. They would be working remotely and still being part of this team and being able to build capacity for the organization to have an Indigenous voice and Indigenous lens that they've never had before.
I feel that, like, I'm the only American Indian in our institution, so definitely feel that there's a requirement to move to Chicago, and I was like, not doing it. I think I faked it for long enough now that they think I did it. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I feel like, because there's this learning curve, right, especially for American Indian, Alaska Native, and that's how the federal government tracks us. I'm trying to move to more using the terminology of Indigenous people. But as an educator, I'm such a rule follower. American Indian, Alaska Native, there's 574 tribes. I got my numbers, but even in the work of racial equity and justice, through an Indigenous lens, that justice does mean how are we living our culture and values out loud? Can we do that? Have we been allowed to do that? And stepping back to ask that question for ourselves as Native organizations, because I see national groups like Unity and ACES, American Indian Sciences and Engineering Society. Unity is totally spacing out at the moment. United
and Tribal Youth.
Yeah.
It's hard to say it all.
Too many acronyms.
Yeah.
What is it
We have a
again?
lot of acronyms.
National Native Youth Organization.
Yeah. United National
tribe, no, Indian tribal youth.
Indian tribal youth. Yeah, somewhere. I mean, even National Congress of American Indians, like governance structures are all asking the question. We've worked so hard to be recognized as leaders and authorities with the structures imposed on us, but how are we living our identities as Indigenous people within those structures? And so I've seen a lot of movements among tribal colleges and universities, Native-owned nonprofits, and new Native organizations and businesses really living their values out loud. I think of a couple like Ho-Chunk Inc., right? Recognize there was a need for separation of powers for business and governance. And they also realized we're super assimilated and colonized, but how do we live our values out loud, giving opportunities to our people, right? So when you look at Ho-Chunk Inc., you're like, wow, they really are successful with, like the white man way of capitalism. No, they're actually living their values out loud as well within this construct of capitalism and entrepreneurship. But then we've got tribes like the Salish Kootenai on the Flathead Reservation, two very distinct tribes, who were dammed with a local dam, which name totally escapes me at the moment. But again, recognize they're super colonized. But they bought the dam so they can return the land and waters to the people. They don't know how to do that quite yet, but they're trying to figure that out. And so you've got Northwest tribes also having similar conversations of, we need to get rid of the dam. Salmon is a big part of our lifeways here, and they've gone extinct because these dams are in place. So how do we rematriate the lifeways to our people and live our values out loud, even under kind of colonial oppression? It's like we've got to call ourselves back into these spaces, and how are we doing that? So it's a journey for all of us, and to see whatever measure of success you want to use. I think that's a hard question, only because it's like whose success, whose definition of success are you using, right? And for Indigenous people, the colonial construct was never made for us. It doesn't benefit us. And we're trying to break down what we can to live our lives out loud. And but we're now asking that question too, right? Like we're now taking those steps forward. And I think when we start seeing lower suicide rates, our less food deserts, more people being connected to their food systems and lifeways, knowing their language. I'm not fluent, but I speak what I can because most people have never heard Indigenous language before. So I try to at least bring that into spaces where I am. I mean, it's our responsibility to bring our being into spaces that are not there. And it's your responsibility as our allies now to lift those voices and carry them forward within the work that you're doing. So it's all about right relationships.
I think to echo some of the things that each of you have said a little bit, just letting communities lead is, I think, a big piece of that. But I think that there's a lot of examples of success of when communities are leading their own initiatives. A lot of my examples come from food sovereignty initiatives. They are defining success or their vision of the future for themselves, which is part of being self-determining or sovereign. And some of the most innovative solutions to the challenges that they're facing, but they're using ancestral knowledge and technology because they're reviving it. And there are so many, sometimes barriers to doing that because funding has all these constraints, but if we're getting able to define what success is, then our tribal economies don't have to look a certain way. Our jobs, our education doesn't have to look a certain way. And I think honestly, individuals and communities know what they need for healing and to live well. And really, if we're in a good relationship, all we're here to do is to support that, right? And so, yeah, I think it comes back to just letting people lead and define like what that really looks like for them.
I'm just curious. A lot of what I've seen and experienced around Indigenous sovereignty is not unique to what the modern U.S. boundaries are, right? Indigenous people all over the world that have been oppressed. And I'm just curious how, if at all, you are plugged into a larger global movement, and what are some ways that you can continue to support that as individuals? And the second part of my question is, how are folks of Indigenous backgrounds who are migrating to the U.S. Finding their way to institutions or not, perhaps, that serve some of the needs? And part of why I say this is my family is Mischief from southern Mexico, and we moved to the U.S. and became Mexican or something else. And there's been a ton of erasure through migration that our ancestors migrated in many ways. So I'm just curious how, if at all, you guys are seeing some of those integrations and connections to folks whose ancestral lands may not be like the specific place that may be other parts of the continent, but are finding themselves here because of the various systems that have made their moves necessary.
So Native Americans in philanthropy is new to this journey as far as the international focus, especially Indigenous people in Mexico, Central America, and South America. While relationships have been individual all throughout the 30 years of our organization, our specific relationships now with Hispanics in philanthropy, recognizing that Indigenous people is our common thread, and then also working to really acknowledge the Indigenous people on both sides of the border. We just did a border tour with the Pascua Yaqui and the Tohono O'odham tribes, who have tribal members on both sides of the border, and learning about those issues. And then also, we are a Borealis grantee for their racial equity fund. And so doing consultation with them to help them understand more, because because our next convening is going to be close to the border. And so bringing in, the tribal perspectives to that. But I feel like we're really new and there's a lot to do. We had one panel at our summit that canceled, and I filled it in that was when the fires were going on in the Amazon. And so I wanted an Amazon update, and then also Mauna Kea, that protest with all the arrests just had happened. So I definitely wanted those two things to be incorporated. But I feel like we're new on this learning journey, and being small and scrappy. I mean, we're only 5 staff total, and we're down 2. So, I mean, we're moving forward. We're just announced our next grant round. So it's like we're small and scrappy, but we personally don't have the capacity to do all the things we would love to do, which would be more of the international work. But wherever and whenever and however we can, we are hearing about Ecuador and things that are happening. And we see the border, the children being separated. I mean, we're watching, and so being able to, uplift, and open up doors for those stories to be heard is critically important for us, and just one way to, begin. But we're new on that journey.
I'm really excited to see the connection with this community. They have not been historically good on issues of indigeneity, from what I've seen, so that's really exciting. Or Afro-Latina. So,
Yeah, the same is true as like a lot of Black philanthropic organizations embrace their Black identity, but not that Indigenous ancestry either. So it's like we're trying to really connect the dots. Language matters, right? Semantics matter, and so when we can see and hear those intersections through storytelling and through narrative, it's much easier for the environment around the structures of the organizations to make the right decision of partnering and building relationships, and getting out of the silo of which many have been in, and that's a lot of my work too. I think with faith-based organizations is really connecting the dots for them to see a connection to what's happening with immigration, what's happening with indigenous issues, what's happening with women and pieces. I mean, I think we're the only denomination to create a sanctuary, to be a sanctuary denomination in the church or in the country. There's a lot of issues around that, but it started at the border. It started with a movement called Amparo, and forgive me because I don't remember what that stands for. I know it's also a Spanish word, but it's an acronym for the work as well. Because a lot of people were doing work at the border, and finally saying, hey, we're seeing this treatment of genocide of indigenous people happening not only at our border, but in Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Guatemala, Puerto Rico, or Costa Rica, and all these other places, right? How are we connecting the dots? Because the footprint of the church is in all of these places. So becoming a sanctuary denomination is really impactful there. But what does that mean? Like, how do you put that into action? It's so brand new, right? And I feel like some of the movements for indigenous people building partnerships with other demographics and organizations within those demographics is climate justice, and that whole movement, being indigenous led, and organizations just kind of like, yep, we're going to sign on and allow you to be leaders. We're just going to build capacity and strengthen numbers, strengthen money, strengthen all of these resources that are going directly to the people on the front lines, organizations on the front lines, and allow for advocacy to happen. Because in that is those trainings and educational pieces that build not only the movement, but allowing the organization to build capacity through that type of work is incredibly needed. Because I think of all the major movements, everybody sees the headlines, but they don't see the advocacy work and the education happening and the organizing happening, right? The American Unity Movement wasn't successful because of all the direct action pieces. No, they got funded mostly through faith-based organizations to do advocacy workshops, organizing 101, and they funded small programs throughout the country that allowed for urban Indian communities and tribal communities to establish some agency, whether it was through a radio station or urban programming that met the needs within that community. Some of those are still here today, 40 years later. But it was all about directing resources to people on the ground, build their capacity, and allow them to get that work done. And when you think of when these bills were passed, very conservative, well, not by today's standard conservative, but at that time, conservative administrations and Congresses to allow for American Indians to have right to self-determination, American Indian religious freedom, economic development, right, Indian Child Welfare Act, giving our children back. Like, that was organizing. That was a lot of work happening at the ground level to create that pressure so that congressional representatives made the right decision and voted to pass those bills, moving us into an era of self-determination. And that's being threatened now, Like, we thought, we're like, all right, cool, we got there. And no, they can take it away from us.
There's definitely, at least from the food sovereignty movements globally, a lot of solidarity work happening amongst indigenous people, a lot of intertribal efforts across Turtle Island to do capacity building with each other through cultural revitalization, through finding alternative or new ways of like economies that are not so extractive, so there are a lot of different examples, but it's definitely happening across Turtle Island, across the globe, conversation, because many indigenous people experience the same thing: land grabbing and these kind of monster, faceless, multinational organizations and corporations, that make it really hard for family farms or land-based people to maintain their lifeways. And there's definitely, I've been really privileged to actually, how we met was through Slow Food Movement at a gathering. And I was really privileged to be a part of like a global gathering of Indigenous youth. They still consider me a youth.
Hold on to that.
You can't tell my wisdom here yet.
But you know, I'm trying to sit down and strategize with each other how we can support each other in doing that, and what that means for in our local community. Like, you know, so it's happening. You know, and I think we're still trying to like figure that out. Like, each community, part of sovereignty, like is defining, like I said earlier, defining that for yourself. And you know, so each community's food system is going to work different, but they're trying to figure out how they can also work and support each other in that.
Yeah, we all have experience out of the colonialism and the dilemmas that it, and disappearances that it brings. So we have solidarity in that. And at MSU, we changed the name of our program from American Indian to American Indian Indigenous Studies to reflect really the students and what the goals of the program were. Because it was not just American Indian Studies, it never really was to begin with. So it just really was reflecting of what the faculty, the affiliated faculty members were already made up of Latinx, Indigenous Studies, just people coming from all over, and the students as well. So it just was a natural change 4 or 5 years ago now. Really long to say, but it just probably someday it'll just be Indigenous Studies because it makes more sense. But maybe keeping, I don't know. But we all experience that, and that's that solidarity. I see that also in our graduate student group, our Indigenous graduate student collective on campus. I see it in our different movements that have kind of been talked about as well. I see it in the international students that are coming to campus and the struggles that they're experiencing. We do a mentorship program with them, specifically for my program, for my in community sustainability, where older graduate students are paired up with the younger graduate students, and some of those are Indigenous students, specifically to help mentor them through kind of the changes that are going on. And I definitely make sure that if they're Indigenous, that they're getting someone that's Indigenous, because it's just a different set of challenges when you're coming as well. So yeah, it's definitely, I see that happening, because we search out similar people that get it, right? You don't always want to walk into a space and have to explain yourself, frankly. I always want to build bridges and always want to, I love that work. I love that translation work. I really, really do. I love being in these spaces, actually. But there's some days that I just want to go and be like, let's go talk about food. So really, and I don't want to necessarily explain myself fully. So there's also that work too. So there's that solidarity spaces that I want to be in as well. That feeds me to do the other work. Right? So that I can sit in these spaces and not want to rage all the time about certain other things that happen on my campus and things that I have to go protest and people that I have to, and board of trustees meetings that I have to go to, and things that I shouldn't have to go deal with when I just need to go write a dissertation. So, those things that happen. Just a dissertation. It'll happen. I'm graduating in May. It's happening no matter what. It's just I keep on telling myself.
I have a question. Just about the Indigenous Studies. Is this a class or is it like a specific major?
So we have a minor and a graduate certificate right now at Michigan State. So as of this fall, we have a graduate certificate. The minor's been going on for years. And we've really envisioned, we decolonized the hell out of this graduate certificate. So there's only one required class. It's an online class, so that students that need to necessarily go home to their communities can do it online, and graduate students sometimes are all over the place. But then also you get credit for doing things in the community. So there's like a list of, and if you join a student organization like Indigenous Graduate Student Collective, if you go and participate in different community actions or community organizations or a whole host of different things that what we think about education and Indigenous knowledge. If you go to our sugar bush, for example, and do maple sugaring, that's one option for our graduate certificate because that's how we think about our knowledge. Instead of just sitting in a classroom and learning in a Western way of framework. But that, and they approved it. So we pushed it through. But yeah, it's a minor, undergraduate minor, and then now a graduate certificate. And my dream, I pushed you for but our dream for the next, because we just did a visioning strategic plan. That's why it was at the front of my mind like 2 weeks ago. My dream in the next 5 years for our program is to have a major, and we're going to have our own department, which with faculty lines, and yeah, we're going to take over the university. It needs it. I might not still be there, but it needs it.
Are there any other quicker questions? Can I ask to share your email address? Oh, beautiful.
I was just gonna say about like the worldwide indigenous movement, because I noticed like specifically in Detroit, we have a large like Latin American community, and they've been like reclaiming their indigenous identity. Like that's more, I've noticed at least in my age group, more people say indigenous over Native American, because like even our Peace and Dignity ceremony, our like Mishtek and Michigan people who come and dance and do our Peace and Dignity ceremony. Like even like Los Angeles, the indigenous people stay there is mostly like the like trying to dismantle like the Latino identity, and, like who know their identity, like reclaiming it, and like even like the environmental justice forefront. There's like most of the leaders are like of Native like Latin identity, like Nina Gualinda, Allison Hayes, Jessica Martina, and all of these people. Because 2%, like the indigenous people make up like 2% of the population, but control 80% of the world's protected like biodiversity. So it's like things like that.
In the interest of time, I do want to cut the Q&A short. I'm sure there are other questions and whatnot. What I was going to ask earlier was, do you mind if I share email addresses? When we share resources?
Yeah,
like, how does
absolutely.
that-
And I'm going to take a sign-in sheet that hopefully everybody put their info on so I can blast things out.
And I'll do a follow-up email.
And maybe I'll give you what I have because I might be missing folks.
Okay.
And you'll be able to tell me.
Yeah. And I'll for sure share it out in the
Right.
thank you for sharing yourself all day today and being here. I really appreciate it. And Shiloh was talking about performing trauma and whatnot, and as a Black person, definitely know a little bit about that. And so I appreciate how you showed up here. And just want to thank everybody in the room for making space for that. Because this, as I described in the little write-up, this is larger than me. This is a commitment on each of our own. And I love the comment about making it personal and starting there.